Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill, the show where we talk about bitter pills of truth that people may not want to hear about and the mainstream media may not tell you about. So, tonight I had several topics that I wanted to cover. The main story I wanted to focus on was the decision by the Cornel West campaign, by his acting campaign manager and advisor Jill Stein and Cornel West himself and others, to hire Peter Daou, who is a former campaign manager for Hillary Clinton, or excuse me, supporter and promoter of Hillary Clinton back in 2016. I don't think he was her campaign manager. Former campaign manager for John Kerry in 2004. And someone who quitted Democratic Party in 2020, was a Bernie Sanders supporter during the 2019-2020 campaign, and has been a Green Party supporter, voted for Howie Hawkins since 2020. And so it's certainly understandable that this choice has provoked a lot of controversy, because he does have that history of being involved with the Democratic Party. But I want to make sure that we're giving him a fair look, and I don't feel like a lot of people have been doing that. Right from the start, people have been focused on what he did in 2016 and at other points in the past couple of decades, supporting basically mainstream Democrats like John Kerry and Hillary Clinton. Although at the same time, he's been critical of both parties throughout that time, including of their support for the war in Iraq and their support for Israel and so forth. And for more details on his past and how he explains it, you can have a look at an interview he did a few days ago with Sabrina, Sabby Sabs, of the Sabby Sabs podcast, which I'll put a link to in the video description. But I mainly want to focus on just looking at his overall political perspective as best we can tell, and his actions over the last few years. And you talk about why I don't think that this is some sort of monumentally bad decision or whatever that will significantly hurt Cornel West's campaign. So let's have a look at, first of all, at Jill Stein's statement about the decision to hire Peter Daou as Cornel West's campaign manager. Okay, well, let's start with the fact that, as Jill Stein announced on September 12th, a few days ago. She was the one who, I don't know if I would say made the decision, but was most instrumental in the decision to bring Peter Daou on board. She says, newsflash, it was me that brought Peter Daou to Cornel West. Why? Because I learned how essential an experienced campaign manager is for my campaigns without one. So, basically she's saying she thinks that her campaigns in 2012 and 2016 as the Green Party presidential candidate were not as successful as they could have been because she didn't have an experienced campaign manager. And she believes that having an experienced campaign manager will, in contrast, be helpful to Cornel West's campaign. So she goes on to say, he's the most experienced campaign manager I know of with independent/green politics and strong opposition to duopoly. And we'll get into what she saw in him as far as evidence of independent/green politics and strong opposition to duopoly in a moment. She goes on to say, though I didn't know of Peter Daou in his days as DNC defender, it's not hard to see how a war-torn, bloody childhood led to fierce opposition to Bush and bondage to the Dem Party. If only more liberal apologists would have this kind of wake-up. With an experienced campaign manager, our team can give Cornel West the support he needs to break the duopoly and give all those thrown under the bus reason to fight back. So my comment on this, because I basically, although I take a wait and see attitude, I critically supported this decision because I did what Jill Stein did, or some of what she did. I looked at his track record. So I said, it's unbelievable to me how the very same people who go on and on about the vital importance of reaching out to people on the right, which we should, but why harp on them in particular, even if they're hardcore racists, are like, oh my God, how could Cornel hire a former Democrat? Do these people hear how hypocritical they sound? Okay. Well, let's look at some things that Peter has said over time, and you can make up your own mind. Although certainly I'll offer my opinion as well. Let's see. Okay, well, first of all, let's look at evidence that indeed Peter Daou supported Howie Hawkins and the Green Party in 2020. So, let's see. I guess he doesn't. He hadn't really said anything prior to the election, it doesn't look like, about it. But so he says on December 5th, 2020, shortly after the election, why are these establishment trolls obsessed with Bernie? I've barely mentioned his name for months. I voted Hawkins Walker, and I'm fully opposed to the establishment Bernie supports. And yet people still claim I criticize Biden and Dems because Bernie lost. It's laughable. Answering in good faith, Biden was uniquely disqualified, and I said so in early 2019. I'll get to what he means by that in a minute. In a just world, Hawkins/Walker, the Green Party presidential and vice presidential candidates in 2020 would have won. 3, I've spent decades protesting, organizing, fundraising, advising, and writing, not just tweeting for and working to build leftist power. Okay, so he tells several people he voted for Howie Hawkins. Okay, well, why does he say Biden was uniquely disqualified and said so in early 2019? Well, can you take a guess why he might have said Biden was uniquely disqualified? And I might add that he had the same thoughts about Trump being uniquely disqualified in the same way. Can you guess? Well, check this out. Ex-Hillary advisor Peter Daou on hashtag fire Chris Hayes push. This level of rape apology from Dems is appalling. Published April 30th, 2020. Well, what happened around that day? Well, Joe Biden was basically handed the Democratic Party nomination in April. Bernie Sanders endorsed him. He had a big love fest where Sanders was like, "Oh, Joe Biden is my good friend, and I look forward to a progressive administration. It's going to be the most progressive administration since FDR." Well, Peter Daou was not saying that at all. He said, okay, I'll just read this. Peter Daou, a former top advisor to Hillary Clinton, ripped some Democrats as rape apologists for attacking MSNBC host Chris Hayes over his decision to cover Tara Reade's sexual assault allegations against former Vice President Joe Biden. If you think only the GOP is responsible for this topsy-turvy world, look no further than hashtag fire Chris Hayes trending, because Chris Hayes had the journalistic integrity to cover an important Me Too story against a Democrat. Daou tweeted Thursday, "This level of a rape apology from Dems is appalling." Okay, so it goes on and talks about critics and defenders of Chris Hayes' story about Tara Reade's case. And okay, I didn't have a chance to look this up before the stream, so I just want to see if I can find out what Peter Daou was saying about Biden in 2019. Well, okay, well, there's a lot. Maybe I can't find it without doing an advanced search. Well, maybe I'll do an advanced search. I'm very curious about this. Now let's do 2. Let's shift it back a little. March 30th, 2019. If you believe women when it's Brett Kavanaugh, then you believe women when it's Joe Biden or Bill Clinton. Double standards dilute principles. So, as you might recall, Tara Reid is far from the only woman who has made sexual misconduct allegations against Joe Biden. In fact, there were 7 other women who came out with allegations of various sorts of groping and other harassment by Joe Biden, along with Tara Reid, in March and April of 2019, when Biden was just getting into the campaign. And then the following year, in March of 2020, Tara Reid announced, first on the Katie Halper show and shortly thereafter on Megyn Kelly's show, that she told her story about Joe Biden having, according to her, and she told many other people at the time or shortly after, Joe Biden raped her digitally in the basement of a congressional office building. So Peter Daou was paying attention to this and was found Joe Biden completely unacceptable as a candidate because of that. And as I mentioned, he supported Bernie Sanders in 2020. So sorry, I forgot to share the tab. If you believe women when it's Brett Kavanaugh, then you believe women when it's Joe Biden or Bill Clinton. Double standards dilute principles. Sorry about that. Okay, let's continue with other stuff from Peter Daou. Well, what's he said about Israel and Palestine? He's from Lebanon, grew up there, and according to his account, he was drafted into a Lebanese militia during the Civil War there, in I guess it would have been early 1980s, and was underwent mandatory military training, and he didn't want to be involved in war or the military. Tried to get out of the country, and finally, a couple of years later, his parents were able to get him out of the country, and he came to the United States. Well, what does he think about the Israel-Palestine situation? Okay, where did it go? Jesus, that's weird. All right. Okay, so he talks here in 2021 about various atrocities committed by Israel against the Palestinians. Says, as the son of a Jewish mother and Christian father, I guess, they're in Lebanon, I have reflected and I want to apologize to the Palestinian people for not being a stronger advocate against their oppression. Now is not the time to sugarcoat apartheid. So he's responding there to a tweet by Mark Ruffalo, who is, I know he's some kind of celebrity, some actor. Never really heard of him, but he's got 8 million followers, so I guess some people have, obviously. But anyway, Mark Ruffalo was apologizing for being critical of Israel. He said that calling what Israel is doing genocide is not accurate. It's inflammatory, disrespectful, and is being used to justify anti-Semitism here and abroad. Now is the time to avoid hyperbole. So Peter said, I read you that. He called it apartheid as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, who are not really noted for being objective about human rights in countries where the U.S. Has a vested interest, like Israel. Nonetheless, those two human rights organizations, have in fact called the Israeli occupation and oppression of Palestine and the Palestinians apartheid. And so has the Jewish human rights group B'Tselem, and so have many, many other people. And Peter Daou does as well. It is not anti-Semitic, he says, to oppose the oppression of the Palestinian people. I say this both as a human being and as son of a Jewish mother. Okay, more comments on atrocities by Israel. And of Donald Trump, he said, okay, in responding to Nancy Pelosi after the State of the Union speech, Pelosi said, Democrats will never stop extending the hand of friendship to get the job done for the people. We will work to find common ground with Trump or whoever where we can, but we'll stand our ground where we cannot. State of the Union. And Peter says, you're extending a hand of friendship to a racist who tortures migrant children, abandons the Kurds to genocide, strips sick babies of health care, and incites Nazi violence. Why? Okay, that doesn't really relate to Israel, Palestine, but anyway, it got in here somewhere. Joe Biden, Israel has a right to defend itself, quote. Peter Daou, Israel obliterated the building that houses Al Jazeera and other international media agencies. They're in Gaza. They deliberately bombed a building that housed media agencies in Gaza because they don't like honest reporting on what's going on there. 2018. So this is well before he left the Democratic Party. Nonetheless, he was critical of Israel. I keep seeing headlines like 52 killed in Gaza or clashes kill dozens, as if to hide the fact that it's Palestinian protesters being slaughtered. Do better, media. Here he is defending Ilhan Omar from criticisms that she's anti-Semitic because of her criticism of Israel. Accusations are flying around, but there's no distinction being made between criticizing Israel versus being anti-Semitic. So the Biden position is basically let Israel keep bombarding Gaza, right? In May 17th, 2021. Ted Cruz speaking out in favor of slaughtering Palestinian children. Palestinian children don't exist to people like this. Senator Tom Cotton, who said Israelis and Palestinians would be able to live in safety and security if Hamas stopped launching rockets at schools, synagogues, and homes. Put the blame where it belongs with the terrorists of Hamas. And Noam Chomsky had very apt point about this, which is that just as a matter of course, whoever the United States government calls terrorists are groups of people who carry out terrorism on a very small scale, relatively speaking. So, Hamas, people associated with Hamas or other Palestinian groups have committed acts of terrorism. Meanwhile, there's state terrorism, where the extremely well-funded Israeli military is constantly bombing civilians in Gaza, for instance, and demolishing homes and ripping up people's orchards and farms and denying them the ability to make a living and so on and so forth. Okay, well, I hope you get the picture here. Peter has very long been supportive of Palestinian rights. Here he is defending Rashida Tlaib for in response to accusations against her being anti-Semitic, for saying that she was calmed by the fact that her Palestinian ancestors created a safe haven for Holocaust survivors. Israel killing Palestinian children. Young Palestinian girl being beaten up by the police. Okay, let's see what else we want to discuss here. Okay, so Peter posted a thread a while back. Just a week ago, saying, I am vehemently opposed to Donald Trump, a bigot, sexist, and criminal. That said, I want to challenge the liberal assumption that Biden is vastly superior. In fact, there are metrics by which Biden is objectively worse than Trump. So it certainly doesn't sound like the Biden is vastly less evil than Trump point of view that he's been accused of, and even Cornel West has been accused of. So let's get into this thread. So the first point he makes, Biden has presided over far more COVID deaths than Trump. He declared, quote, independence from the pandemic a few months after taking office, July 4th, 2021, and never looked back, methodically dismantling the COVID safety net. By his own COVID standards, he shouldn't be president. And what he's referring to there is Joe Biden's statements a few weeks before the election. 220,000 deaths. If you hear nothing else I say tonight, hear this. Anyone who is responsible for that many deaths should not remain president of the United States. But when Trump left office, there had been about 400,000 deaths from COVID. And now there are officially, like 1.2 million. So there have been 800,000 COVID deaths in the 2.5 years that Biden has been in office. And there were actually, even though we started vaccinating people in December of 2020, and half of Americans were vaccinated about 6 or 7 months later, nonetheless, during his first year of office, Joe Biden had more blood on his hands as far as deaths from COVID than Donald Trump did during his year or so of being in office during the pandemic, even though there was a benefit of vaccines, because as you may recall, in May of 2021, the Biden administration and the Centers for Disease Control announced that people who had been vaccinated didn't need to wear a mask. They didn't think they needed to wear a mask, that the vaccine would sufficiently protect people from getting infected or passing it on to others, so they didn't have to worry about it. Now, of course, as I've commented here before, I mean, not only does that rest on the false premise that vaccines put some sort of magical shield around your body that prevents you from getting infected. Actually, not only COVID vaccines, but basically no vaccines prevent 100% of infections. Even though they do present a lot according to the clinical trials and other research, but by no means is it sensible to rely on only one measure, vaccination, which of course not everybody got vaccinated, to prevent people from getting infected. It works pretty well at reducing the number of deaths. You compare vaccinated and unvaccinated people, and a lot fewer vaccinated than unvaccinated people die from COVID or are hospitalized with COVID. But of course, not only did vaccinated people start getting infected at a somewhat higher rate and infecting other people once they had ditched their masks in public settings, but obviously, if you go into a store, they don't check. They at that time, they didn't check to see if you were vaccinated. There actually weren't any vaccine mandates at that time at all. So even if you went into, say, a restaurant, they didn't check your vaccination card or anything like that. So people just stopped wearing masks in general, regardless of whether they were vaccinated or not, for several months after this announcement. And then the Delta variant came along. COVID, SARS-CoV-2 virus evolved into a much more transmissible variant, and suddenly it became a fairly common thing for even vaccinated people to get infected with COVID. They were still less likely than unvaccinated people to, but it wasn't so uncommon anymore. And just in general, virus was more contagious, so more people were getting infected. And then Omicron came along later that year, much more transmissible than Delta, even though depending on what study you look at, some studies said it was not as likely to produce severe disease. Other studies didn't suggest that, but it was much more infectious. So a lot more people got infected then, and just the same or even a slightly lower rate of death results in more people dying if you've got a virus that's twice as infectious as its predecessor variant. So anyway, Biden, his administration, there was. I don't want to get sidetracked on this, but there were many cases where basically any attempt to control the rate of infections was disincentivized and not encouraged. So, what's her name? Former CDC director. Gosh, I'm blanking on her name. But anyway, it doesn't matter. She said something like the Wearing a mask was a scarlet letter, the reference to the Nathaniel Hawthorne, I believe it was, the story of the scarlet letter where the woman committed adultery and she was required to put a red scarlet letter on her forehead, A for adulteress, to shame her. And so the CDC director implied that wearing a mask was like that, which is ludicrous. And then in fall of 2022, Joe Biden declared the pandemic over, even though it isn't. We still don't keep very good, or we don't keep very good statistics on how many people are getting infected. Generally, when people get infected, they don't test or they don't report the test if they do test. So we don't know how many people are getting infected, but judging from statistics on the amount of virus in wastewater, quite a few people are getting infected with COVID these days, roughly the same as at points much earlier in the pandemic. Anyway, let's go on. Abuse of migrants. Biden has been downright Trumpian on immigration. Obama and Biden built the child cages that Trump used. As president of the United States, Biden continued Trump and Stephen Miller's heinous policies and even exceeded their cruelty, particularly against Haitian migrants. Sexual misconduct. Trump is despicable on sexual abuse, facing multiple rape accusations. He was found liable for sexually abusing E. Jean Carroll. Biden isn't worse than Trump, but still faces at least 8 accusations of sexual misconduct and groping. And he links an article here: president should not get away with sexual misconduct. So we're looking at a repeat of 2020, assuming that Joe Biden stays in the race and Donald Trump is able to run for president, where you've had 2 accused rapists, 2 people accused of rape and other sexual misconduct, running for president. Those were the 2 major party options in 2020, and it may very well be the case in 2024. Warmongering. Biden and his neocons outdo Trump on the thirst for conflict and war. Biden pushed a larger military budget than Trump and has saber-rattled across the globe. According to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist, the doomsday clock is now the closest to midnight it's ever been. Climate emergency. Biden and Democrats have been recklessly negligent in dealing with the existential threat of climate change. They put band-aids on a gushing wound, pretending to be taking real action, when in fact they are barely better than Republican climate change deniers. Quotes here an article from the Washington Post. Biden is approving more oil and gas drilling permits on public lands than Trump, analysis finds. It goes on to say, the claim that Biden is the only thing standing between us and fascism falls apart on real scrutiny. From warmongering to oil drilling, racist policing to coddling dictators, stifling free speech to abusing migrants to vast economic pain, Biden is more a villain than a savior. More Americans are ending up homeless at a record rate. Nearly a quarter of U.S. adults sometimes don't get enough to eat. Go to any other wealthy country just about, and you certainly won't find that nearly a quarter of their adult population sometimes goes hungry because they can't afford food. But in Joe Biden's America, that's what we have. Anyway, so this idea that Peter Daou is much less critical of Biden than he is in Trump just doesn't withstand scrutiny. Okay, what does he think about Bernie Sanders? November 5th, 2020. So this was right as the 2020 election was happening. It was Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. And Sanders having endorsed Biden and not made any demands of him or really criticized him much at all. You know, from April when he made the endorsement onward in 2020. I've barely mentioned Bernie Sanders in the past few months, yet just about every thread of mine has trolls slamming him and saying he's, quote, my candidate. The establishment hates him more than they hate Trump, even though he worked tirelessly for Biden. Uh, Anyone who thinks principled progressives and leftists are a cult, easily led around by leaders. So, he's referring to people who may or may not have supported Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020, but didn't necessarily do so after that. Anyone who thinks principled progressives and leftists are a cult easily led around by leaders, look no further than how quickly Bernie and AOC have lost influence on the left after cozying up to the establishment. And in a similar vein, harsh truth, Bernie folded into the establishment. It's his right and his choice. His contribution is immensely important. But anyone who thinks the left is still about Bernie doesn't really understand that the movement isn't about a single individual, but a set of principles. On Team Bernie supporting Biden. When I left the Dem establishment after 2016, I didn't do it to then turn around and embrace it in 2020. When I quit the party this year, it was because the party upholds a corrupt system. How can you morally oppose a system, then give it power? Speaking of the Democratic Convention, what the hell are Michelle Obama and Bernie Sanders doing headlining with anti-choicer Republican John Kasich at the Dem Convention? So basically, Peter left the Democratic Party in 2020. Trying to find out if he announced this anywhere, but basically, right when Bernie Sanders endorsed Joe Biden in April of 2020, and he basically just sold out. Did nothing but praise Biden from then on. Peter Daou left the Democratic Party because he saw that even the progressives like Bernie Sanders and AOC were selling out to the establishment. Oh, this is interesting. I didn't see this before. And let me demonstrate why this isn't about Bernie. I called for Biden not to enter the race more than a year ago. And why did he call for Biden not to enter the race in April of 2019? He said, the next Democratic nominee will be running against a self-avowed sexual assaulter. I, for one, want the moral high ground in 2020. No candidate is perfect, but there must be some basic standards we demand of our candidate. Inappropriate contact with women and girls is a serious problem. So April 1st was the day, April 1st of 2019 was the day when several women came out with allegations against Joe Biden regarding sexual misconduct. There are a few issues that I definitely don't agree with Peter on. Well, wait. Let me just look at this. What does Peter think about capitalism and socialism? So Peter seems to be a pretty harsh critic these days of capitalism. Is this the most ruthlessly capitalist headline ever? Americans are dying younger, saving corporations billions. Yes, capitalism or socialism. Um, this is, of course, a scene from the United States, Austin, Texas. Looks like Biden declares his loyalty to capitalism, endorses billionaires as long as they pay a little bit of taxes. How's capitalism doing? Nearly a quarter of U.S. adults sometimes don't get enough to eat. This was on August 6th of this year. I'm not leaving Twitter, he said on April 25th of last year. I'm staying here to keep saying capitalism is a scourge. July 30th of this year, Democrats are not leftists. Democrats and liberals are not the left. Why? In large part because leftists are anti-capitalist and Democrats/liberals are not. Fuck capitalism, he said a year ago, approximately. It's October 26, 22. When I moved more to the left after 2016, it was to get further away from right wing ideology, duopoly, fascism, and capitalism. To be crystal clear, I am and always have been 100% opposed to the Republican Party. They are right wing extremists and a haven for Nazis and fascists. But that does not mean I support the Democratic establishment, the duopoly, the oligarchy, or this capitalist hellscape. Okay. Well, what don't I like about Peter's points of view? Okay, let's see. What do you have to say about China? I seem to recall there were some things that. Okay, well, he's definitely not on board with this new Cold War against China and Russia. He says Biden and his neocons are escalating against Russia, China, and Iran. He's more of a warmonger than Trump ever was. Doesn't sound like somebody who's a supporter of lesser evil Democrats to me. But liberals won't say a word because their entire worldview revolves around Orange Man bad. Can someone please explain what's happening with NBA players and officials siding with repressive China over Hong Kong protests? He said in October of 2019. Well, I have a friend and business partner who lives in Hong Kong, was there during the quote unquote protests in 2019. There were riots. Most of the people in Hong Kong did not support these protests at all. They were not pro-democracy. You had people waving British and American flags and Trump flags, and there was a lot of violence against anybody who disagreed with them, or in some cases just random people. I don't want to get into a discussion of that on this stream. I did write about it in my Substack. But anyway, Peter doesn't know what the hell he's talking about as far as this issue. Okay, so he buys into the propaganda about so-called Uyghur genocide or oppression of the Uyghur Muslim or Uyghur Muslim minority population in China. Again, not something I want to go into detail about on this stream, but he's full of crap here. Okay. What does he say about Russia? Let's see here. May 3rd, 2019. I'm tired of this endless dragging out of the Mueller report. Trump has committed clear impeachable offenses, including subverting the First Amendment. We already know Russia helped elect him, and that he and the GOP welcomed it and covered it up. We know enough to impeach now. So basically, in the 2016 to 2019 period, Peter Daou fully bought into Russiagate, believing that Russia interfered in the U.S. election and that Donald Trump and his associates collaborated with this. I refer to you to work by Glenn Greenwald and Aaron Mate, and also Matt Taibbi. It just totally debunks this crap. There's no evidence whatsoever that the Russian government, or indeed anybody from Russia, other than this Russian marketing firm, did anything to in any way try to influence the 2016 U.S. election and help Donald Trump defeat Hillary Clinton. Even with the Internet Research Agency, the Russian marketing firm, the evidence was pretty mixed that they were actually doing anything other than trying to expand their reach, market the products they were pushing, as opposed to actively campaigning for Donald Trump. Most of the ads they ran were after the election was over or before the campaign started. And most of the ads were not about Trump or Clinton or the election at all. Okay, so more in that vein. Mueller was crystal clear that Russia attacked our democracy, he said on May 29th, 2019. Okay, so definitely not well informed about that issue. However, let's look at what he said more recently. So, all right, I'll just tell you in a nutshell. He's still very critical of Russia. Kind of both sides, the U.S. and Russia, as far as who is to blame for the current conflict in Ukraine. So, for example, he says, "Dear binary thinkers, we can criticize the U.S. without loving Russia. We can criticize Biden without loving Trump. We can criticize without being Republicans without being Dems. We are independents, Greens, leftists," he said a month ago. Biden and his neocons are escalating against Russia, China, and Iran. Oh, I already read that one. This is how cowards are treating anti-war protesters in Russia, he said on the day the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened. Russia invaded Ukraine and has slaughtered countless civilians. That is a moral abomination. That doesn't mean there aren't bad actors on Ukraine's side, nor does it justify the U.S. escalating and sending cluster munitions rather than pursuing a peaceful resolution. Also this summer, all these can be true at once. Putin chose to invade Ukraine, causing massive death and destruction. This is imperialistic, murderous, and criminal. To the U.S. and NATO provoked Russia. Under Biden's neocons, America is conducting a proxy war with the Ukrainian people bearing the brunt. I know how geopolitical gamesmanship works as a survivor of the Lebanese civil war. 3, instead of being the peacemaker, the U.S. has consistently used rhetoric, money, and arms to escalate rather than de-escalate in Ukraine. 4, despite billions from the West, Russia is grinding down Ukraine, and the tide may be turning against Ukraine. No, Peter, the tide was already against Ukraine right from the start of Russia's military operation. And it's civilians who suffer and pay the price. Yes, that's true. But also, around 400,000 Ukrainian soldiers, probably more than that by now, have been killed, and hundreds of thousands more wounded in the conflict. Roughly the same number of Russian soldiers have died as the U.S. lost in Vietnam, and it's only been a year and a half. So there's lots of suffering. Ukraine is being destroyed economically. When Russia launched its imperialistic and brutal invasion of Ukraine, Peter said, I warned that Biden and his national security and foreign policy advisors were not up to the job of dealing with the crisis. Putin is a despot, he says, but the escalation of rhetoric from the White House last year was alarming. The constant beating of war drums. It seemed they wanted the invasion and were goading Putin. Well, yeah, duh. There seem to be several opportunities for the U.S. to play peacemaker and work with global partners to broker a peace deal, but that's not how Team Biden's neocons have played it. He doesn't mention here that there were numerous efforts by the Russian government to play peacemaker and head off the war happening in the first place, and not the topic of the stream, but as I've talked about at length before, basically, what happened in Ukraine was that the U.S. government, led by people such as Joe Biden, vice president at the time, supported in every way they could a coup in Ukraine in 2014, where a group of thugs, at the very least, very right-wing and neoliberal, but in many cases outright fascists, including literal Nazis. They overthrew the elected government of Ukraine in 2014. The U.S. backed it to the hilt. Ukraine has been a very undemocratic society with lots of fascist and Nazi influence ever since then. And shortly after the coup in February of 2014, civil war broke out because the mostly ethnic Russian population in eastern Ukraine was hated by the fascists, and they were being attacked. And their civil rights were being attacked, and they didn't want to be part of Ukraine. So an independent, Crimea overwhelmingly voted to secede from Ukraine and join Russia, and the other eastern Ukrainian provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk voted for independence from Ukraine. And Ukraine couldn't really do much about Crimea because Russia already had a military base, which they've had for many, many decades, in the Ukrainian city of Sevastopol. But they launched an all-out attack on Donetsk and Luhansk, the Donbass region, resulting in thousands and thousands of people being killed in eastern Ukraine. About half of them civilians, but lots of militia members from Donetsk and Luhansk fighting to get the Ukrainian military and the Nazi paramilitary groups out of eastern Ukraine. Um, and so, lots of people died. And Russia tried to resolve that conflict with you know, efforts involving them, France and Germany, as mediators to negotiate a settlement between the Ukrainian government there in Kiev, the coup government, and the governments of the secessionist provinces in eastern Ukraine, the Minsk agreements. So a treaty was signed, but Ukraine basically, the Ukrainian government basically ignored it, and the civil war continued with its ups and downs, and then a major escalation again in early February of 2022, which provoked the war. And prior to that, in December of 2021, Russia had proposed peace treaties involving NATO and the United States and Ukraine, to try and resolve the whole situation in Eastern Europe, as far as this increasing militarization and expansion of NATO and the civil war in Eastern Ukraine and so forth all at once. That was just ignored. And in late February, the governments of those eastern Ukrainian provinces appealed to Russia for help in defending themselves from what intelligence indicated was going to be an all-out invasion by the Ukrainian military. And so that's what actually prompted Russia to intervene. But Peter Daou doesn't know that. He thinks it was just sheer imperialism on the part of the Russian government. He doesn't really understand, in my opinion, what all the details of what led up to the conflict are. Nonetheless, he doesn't support this war. He considers it, a proxy war by the U.S. government against Russia, using the Ukrainian troops as cannon fodder. And so he's consistently called for peace, even though, his view of the situation is not ideal. Okay, well, I've been going for about an hour just on this. So I want to wrap that up, and we'll see what else we get to. But, basically, I guess the question I have to ask the people who are saying, like, well, Peter Daou's an infiltrator, or, oh my gosh, Cornel West has wrecked his campaign by hiring this Democratic operative, and they're just going to be tepid opposition to the Democrats, and so on and so forth. I say, what's the evidence for that? There's no evidence that any of these people have presented that suggests that any of that is true. And so what I've tried to do here is present you with evidence of what points of view Peter Daou has promoted over the last couple of years. Now, there is the issue of he was Marianne Williamson's campaign manager briefly for about a month back in April this year. And Marianne Williamson, of course, is running in the Democratic primaries. So it's certainly understandable to be suspicious about how committed Peter is to breaking with the Democrats. If he was willing to help out a Democratic candidate, be a campaign manager for her, until he quit at the end of April. So in his interview with Sabrina on the Sabby Sabs show, he talked about his rationale for doing that, and he basically said something to the effect of, he, at the time, of course, there was no Green Party candidate. I guess he knew there probably would be one at some point, but there was no sign of any Green Party, any people wanting to run for the Green Party nomination for president. So he just wanted to go with anybody he could that would be in opposition to the neoliberal warmongering agenda of Joe Biden. And granted, Marianne Williamson's position on Ukraine is certainly not as opposed to the U.S. Role in Ukraine as Peter Daou or those of us on the left. But she did challenge Biden's agenda in some other ways, and so he decided to basically, as he put it, just do what he could to shake up the system. Now, personally, I haven't supported a Democrat for president, and never have supported a Republican, but have not supported a Democrat for president since 1992 when I voted for Bill Clinton. In 96, 2000, and 2004, I voted for Ralph Nader, and basically since then have just voted for the Green Party, including Nader in 96 and 2000. And I wish he hadn't done what he did in April, because certainly it is very understandable that it gives people pause. But at the same time, if you look at his track record over the last few years, the fact that he supported Howie Hawkins and other Green Party candidates, and has been extremely critical of Biden and the Democratic Party establishment and of Bernie Sanders, ever since 2020, and of the Democratic Party establishment throughout the years prior to that, after he left the Clinton campaign.